So first we're going to discuss some of the age-related changes that happen to affect sensation in the form of sound and hearing. And in order to talk about some of these changes, we need to first talk about how sound is heard and different structures of the ear that make that possible, right? And so sound travels in waves, right? And when we think about sound and the properties of waves, when we think about kind of the loudness or the volume of a sound, what we're thinking about is the amplitude or the distance from the top of the wave to the bottom, as you can see here. And when we're talking about frequency or how many waves there are in a particular periodic time, we're talking about the pitch, right? Or so is it high-pitched or low-pitched noises? So pitch determines pitch is determined by frequency of sound waves. Loudness and volume is determined by amplitude. And in order for us to convert sound waves in the air into a sound that we can interpret, there are several things that need to happen. The sound waves need to be directed from the outside air into the hearing portion of the ear, which is the inside. These sound waves need to be sensed in some way and then translated into a neural impulse or a neural signal that our brains can interpret. And so I'm going to go into a little bit about how that happens, starting at the outside of the ear, where sound waves are traveling through the air into the inner kind of hearing portion. And so the structure of the external ear, or the pinna, helps channel sound waves into this tube called the auditory canal. And that auditory canal ends at the eardrum, or the tympanic membrane. And the eardrum, or this tympanic membrane, vibrates in response to sound waves that are taken in from the outside. And what's interesting about the tympanic membrane is it actually vibrates with the same frequency as the sound waves themselves. And so it can transmit that pitch to the inner ear. And what the tympanic membrane actually vibrates onto are three small bones in what's considered the middle ear, which you can see right here. The malleus, the incus, and the stapes, right? There are three little bones that vibrate in response to tympanic membrane vibration. And what the function of these three bones really is to amplify sound even more before it reaches the inner ear itself. And there's a kind of an important reason why the vibrations of sound waves need to be amplified before they reach the inner ear. And that's because the sound waves are about to move from air in the external environment to kind of a liquid or a fluid-filled region in the inner ear. And so those middle ear bones amplify the sound waves and transfer them to a structure that's kind of shaped like a snail shell called the cochlea. And this cochlea is filled with fluid. And what actually looks like inside of the cochlea, or the surface of kind of those cochlear membranes, looks like this here. And all of these little white things that you can see in this EM are what are known as stereocilia, which respond to basically move in response to the sound vibrations, or in this case, the fluid vibrations within the cochlea. And so the vibrations need to make it into the ear, vibrate the tympanic membrane, which will then transfer those vibrations to the three bones of the middle ear, which can amplify them. They're then transferred into the fluid-filled cochlea, where stereocilia move in response to these vibrations. And the movement of stereocilia inside of the cochlea causes opening of calcium channels and the release of neurotransmitters, which you can see really well in this image in D here. Right? And so you would have stereocilia that kind of move back and forth in response to a sound vibration in the cochlea. When they bend, they trigger opening of this calcium channel here, and that calcium influx causes release of neurotransmitters from these particular what are called hair cells. And the release of neurotransmitters stimulates nerves, and then that transmits the sound to the brain. So how is this affected by age? So presbycusis, or the time-dependent loss of hearing, is mostly linked to changes that occur in that inner portion of the ear, that fluid-filled cochlea. As we age, there's a decrease in the number of stereocilia present, and if there's less stereocilia, that means there's less of a response to the sound vibrations, which means less calcium influx, less stimulation of neurons, and less transmitting of the sound. Additionally, there's decreases in the movement of the tympanic membrane and the bones of the middle ear. And you can remember that the tympanic membrane is important for transmitting those vibrations to the middle ear bones, and the middle ear bones are really important for amplifying that sound. And the reason there's decreased movement of both of these structures is due to a breakdown in collagen. And we've talked about collagen before in relation to skin and some other tissues. Collagen is a connective tissue. It provides some structure, but also some flexibility. And you can imagine that that's something you need in the eardrum or the tympanic membrane. It needs to be stable, but it needs to be able to move back and forth or vibrate. And it needs to be able to bounce back in order to do that effectively. Because if a sound wave pushes it one way, it needs the ability to bounce back to normal to hear another sound wave. The same is true for the middle ear bones. They need some collagen in between them to effectively amplify that sound. And the breakdown of collagen means that these things are not happening. And so sound is not as effectively transmitted from the outside to the inside, or the inner ear, where that sensing really happens. And this can result in loss of hearing. And so you can see here actually the hearing threshold for both females and males as they age. And so you can see the different frequencies that can be heard by different aged individuals. And this is marked by a hearing threshold, which means that there's basically early in life, there's a relatively low threshold or a relatively low loudness that you need to hear each of these individual frequencies, right? Whether it's a low frequency or a high frequency, or a low pitch sound or a high pitch sound. It doesn't really matter. And so as we age, the threshold for sensing these different sounds in the ear actually increases by a lot, right? So a 70-year-old individual will require a sound that's almost 40 times as loud to be able to hear it the same way that a 20-year-old does. And this is especially true at the higher pitches, right? And so low-pitched sounds are relatively well heard by individuals throughout their lifespan. The higher the pitch, or the higher the frequency, the more likely it is that an individual cannot hear this sound as they age. And that's particularly true and even more exacerbated in this image here, as you can see for males. And so one of the main things that we use to combat this age-related changes, or at least help with hearing, are hearing aids. And what hearing aids do is they really just amplify the sound even further and increase the volume. And by increasing the volume, you can combat that decrease in movement of the tympanic membrane and the middle ear bones by basically exacerbating the sound to make up for the decrease in movement. And so hearing aids have worked pretty well, and ultimately can compensate for most age-related changes to hearing that occur in females and in males.